Good morning. If I could ask you to grab a seat if you haven't done that yet, there's plenty of room. Good morning. My name is Paul Grogan. I'm the president of the Boston Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this morning for this important conversation. I see many familiar faces in the audience, so I don't need to go on at length about what the Community Foundation is or what we do. But one of the things we do, of course, is present research that holds a kind of mirror up to our community and helps us define the challenges and opportunities we face. And that's just the opportunity that we have here this morning. The hospitality industry is often overlooked in discussions of economic development and in the future, and this morning we hope is a partial remedy for that. But just to illustrate how inattentive we have been to this sector, this is the first major report on it in nearly 30 years. We hear all about technology, we hear all about life sciences, we hear all about finance, we hear all about higher education and healthcare, those tremendous building blocks of this extraordinary economy we have. But hospitality is our third largest industry, and 1 in every 10 workers in Massachusetts is employed by this industry. So this is going to be, I think, an important morning as we explore the dimensions of this and what we can do to make it of even greater help to the region. We have a number of luminaries in the audience, so I can't take the time to introduce everyone, except I do want to introduce Pat Mascrotolo, who is the CEO of the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau and helped support this report. Pat, where are you? There he is. Thank you. We are going to follow our, for those of you who are here regularly, this will be a familiar format. We have a major report that's going to be presented to all of us as the next step, and then we have assembled an outstanding panel to explore the findings of the report and its implications. We're very sorry that we have lost Jim Rooney from that panel, the head of the Chamber of Commerce. He is in Nashville dealing with very bad weather, trying to get home, so he apologizes for his absence, and we'll miss him. We are also expecting, she's not here yet, but we are expecting Mayor Kim Driscoll of Salem. Hopefully she will get here by the time of the panel. So without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Mark Mellon of the UMass Donahue Institute, who is the principal author of the report we're releasing today. He serves as Director of Economic and Public Policy Research at the UMass Donahue Institute. Before joining the Institute, Dr. Mellon worked as Deputy Director for Research in the Boston Redevelopment Authority, where he led research teams on demographic and economic research studies, as well as analyses used for public policy advisement and decision-making. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Mellon.
Good morning, everybody. So it's funny, as we were planning to do this, Keith was all over me about staying at 20 minutes, but now I have to go a little slow to let Mayor Driscoll show up. So, so I bought some time, deleted some slides I didn't need to delete, but Mark Mellon, I direct the Economic and Public Policy Research Group at the UMass Donahue Institute. Our team at the UMass Donahue Institute works as a think tank and quasi-consulting company built out of the president's office of the UMass system. We do a lot of work with different kinds of agencies, state government, local government, nonprofits, looking at different kinds of issues in demographics, workforce studies, economic trends, economic impact studies, and so on. I want to thank you all for coming here today. I'm really excited about the opportunity to share the work that we've been doing with the Boston Foundation for the last year. This has really been an ambitious piece of work for us and as the study overall. As Paul already noted, it's been 27 years since folks have paused and stopped and looked at the leisure and hospitality and tourism industry in Massachusetts. But beyond that, this is really a comprehensive look at all the different aspects that have to do with an industry, both in terms of employment trends, wage trends that we see in the industry overall, workforce characteristics and the issues that we see for people who are working in the industry, and then a comprehensive survey that was done with nearly 300 employers across the Commonwealth, and then hour-long interviews with 15 stakeholders in the industry, including CEOs, heads of regional tourism councils, heads of industry organizations, and so on. And then, to top it all off, was a look at some of the occupational opportunities projections and how job training opportunities align with what's out there right now. Separate from the ambition of just taking a look at that entire snapshot of the industry is the ambition of trying to summarize a 100-page report in 20 minutes. So today's presentation really is the greatest hits of the things that we were able to do in the study. If there are certain things that you're interested in knowing, hey, did you guys do this? Did you do that? I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A after the panel, but it's probably in there, I guess, is the punchline of the things that we did. Before I get started, too, I did want to highlight that the amount of enthusiasm for this project I have never seen before in any of the other work that we've done at the Donahue Institute or any other research project that I helped to lead. I can't tell you the number of times I was picked off by somebody at a conference or at a meeting and say, hey, are you guys doing the travel and tourism study? Or how's the travel and tourism study going? Can't wait to hear more about it. The incredible amounts of enthusiasm between people who are leaders in the industry, the heads of the RTCs, different regional economic development organizations. It was really heartening to see how much people in the industry really wanted to see the story told, and then how much they were willing to help us do the work. Analyzing secondary data about industries and workforce is one thing. That data is out there, and you can get access to it, and we're very comfortable doing that kind of work. But we relied heavily on the contributions and help from people in the industry in both pushing out a survey to be able to get as comprehensive a survey as we could, to talk with stakeholders and to help us wrap our minds around some of the core policy issues that might not rise to the surface immediately when you look at secondary data. So with that, I want to thank all the folks who helped us along the way, and take me too long to acknowledge them all. I also like to thank all the folks at the Boston Foundation for their support in doing the work, Paul, Keith, and Rose in particular, but others on the editorial team. And beyond that, the folks at the Donahue Institute, Kathy Tumber, who's here today, helped lead the project, as well as several of the analytical staff, Liz Williams, Mike McNally, and Rod Mutamedy in particular. So with all that out of the way, let me talk about what we're going to do here in this presentation. I'm going to do an overview of the leisure, hospitality, and tourism industry and why it matters, talk about the current state of LHT as we described it, it's the size of the industry, some of the workforce issues, and some of the pipeline concerns for key occupations, and then talk about some of the public policy considerations. So why study LHT? What I found interesting about doing this work, stepping back for a moment, is how this is, in a lot of ways, and Paul already touched on this just a few moments ago, is how this is an inverse of the way we typically talk about industry studies in Massachusetts. All the shine over the last several years has been around high-tech industries, high-skill industries, life sciences, and and for good reason. These are growing sectors that rely heavily on high-skilled labor. But here what we have in the leisure and hospitality industry is, well, one thing, while these kinds of industries set themselves up in Massachusetts, one reason is because of our high-skilled labor. But the second is because of our robust cultural amenities that we have in the state. Young people love to be around teaming activity, great places to eat, cool places to see. And that's our LHT industry. So I think it's an important story to be talking about these kinds of industry sectors that are also feeding the other ones around the state. Separate from that, it tells an important story of inequality, inequity, and what it means to live in a high-cost state for people with modest skills and modest educational attainment. LHT is not the only low-wage industry in Massachusetts, but it is the biggest. And it highlights a lot of the issues that we see in terms of housing affordability, transportation, and other key issues. So as a note here, why study it? It's a large industry with significant direct and spin-off effects in the economy. 376,000 people are employed in the leisure and hospitality industry in Massachusetts. But that's not all. The business spending and consumer spending associated with leisure and hospitality supports another 232,000 jobs in the state. Despite that, industry leaders feel that the sector is overlooked. And while it is an industry with low skill requirements, there's a lot of turnover. And as a result, there's a lot of pressure on employers in order to maintain an adequately staffed workforce. So how do we define leisure and hospitality? We define this as 5 key sectors of the industry: accommodation, which are hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, and other types of lodging; food and beverage, which is the largest part of leisure and hospitality, makes up about 71% of the jobs in the sector. But these are restaurants, bars, coffee shops, and things like that. Performing arts and spectator sports and large-scale events, which include theater and dance, does not include professional sports, which gets asked often, which is good because the wage stuff would get totally out of whack. So that is siloed in another place. Museum and heritage tours, which are obvious, and then amusement and recreation, including amusement parks, sightseeing, and these kinds of things. We chose a conservative definition. We scanned a lot of the other industry studies that have been done all around the country. These were all typically in the definition, and then you saw others that would include aspects of transportation or retail, an embarrassingly large amount of transportation and retail. And for us, what we wanted to do was tell a story about an industry, but tell it in a conservative way. And also because what we do in our analysis is look at spin-off effects in the economy overall, we would be capturing those other ancillary industries that help feed leisure and hospitality, so we didn't want to build too big of a boat and end up with the kind of the Richard Florida effect of the creative economy being all jobs that aren't breaking rocks with other types of rocks. So with that, we wanted to have a conservative way of thinking about leisure and hospitality. So I boiled down the presentation into 3 key takeaway areas, though there, in theory, there could be more. The first is the significance of leisure, hospitality, and tourism in the state's economic profile is grossly overlooked, and we highlighted in a few key areas. As already noted, it's the 3rd largest industry in Massachusetts, employing 376,000 people. The vast majority are in food and beverage, in the food and beverage sector, 71% of the jobs, followed by amusement and recreation, about 12%, and 9% in accommodation. And while 10% of the workforce, 10% of the jobs in Massachusetts are in leisure and hospitality, it has a significant direct and spin-off effect. Overall, the industry supports 608,000 jobs statewide and helps stimulate nearly $70 billion in economic activity throughout the state. So first, this is such a great room, by the way, because so many times when I do these kinds of graphics, I regret them immediately in a large room because who can read them? And it is a little bit difficult here, but given the number of screens we have around, I think it's readable. What we have here are the top 7 sectors in the economy in Massachusetts. And what I'll call your attention to is, well, first we have the blue line, which is eds and meds. That's the largest, which is the largest sector in Massachusetts. Not surprising. Colleges and universities, hospitals, these kinds of things in here, but it's growing as a much more substantial part of our economy now than it was even at the beginning of the century. Second is professional business services. This includes scientific, technical, and other types of business services in the economy. It's one of the worst named sectors out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because what does it mean? But a lot of it is technical, high-skill types of industries. One notable one, life sciences, fits right in here in this professional and business services, so high wage. And then our 3rd largest in that spaghetti mixture of different kinds of industries is our leisure and hospitality sector. 2 things to note is if you follow that yellow line left to right, in 2000, leisure and hospitality was the 5th largest industry in Massachusetts. Steadily over the last 16 years, it has overtaken manufacturing and overtaken retail to be the 3rd largest sector statewide. Retail and leisure and hospitality jockey closely, but if you notice with the grayish line with manufacturing, how much it's dipped this century in terms of its proportion of jobs in Massachusetts overall. So next, thinking about growth and resiliency, the leisure and hospitality industry in Massachusetts has been very resilient this century. What we have here is a line that indexes job growth in leisure and hospitality against all other industries in Massachusetts, treating 2000 as kind of the constant point. What you see here is leisure and hospitality has grown significantly over these 16 years. The annual growth rate of 1.6%, which is about 4 times the state average. Second state-wide, trailing only eds and meds, which was 2.1% annually. And you can kind of see that from the previous slide with just how much eds and meds shoots up. What's also noteworthy here is how resilient leisure and hospitality was during economic downturns. The recession of 2001 didn't really affect our leisure and hospitality industry. And the Great Recession from that 2008 to 2010 period does affect leisure and hospitality, but it bounces back quickly. Big parts of this was the growth of the food and beverage sector and the amusement and recreation sectors. And at my time at the BRA, when we did a study, must have been 2012, and highlighting how the city had recovered all its jobs post the recession, the 2 big places that it occurred was growth in finance, growth in tech, and growth in food. And so you had this binary thing that was happening in terms of wages of which jobs were actually growing, and food being a big part of that. Okay, the map. Leisure and hospitality is everywhere. We have a dozen or so maps in the report, and I was racking my brain about which one was the right one to use. I'll explain what this map is, but the first thing I want to highlight is leisure and hospitality is everywhere, right? In a lot of ways, leisure and hospitality mirrors the distribution of jobs statewide. So about 75% of leisure and hospitality jobs in Massachusetts are in Greater Boston, the North Shore, and the South Shore. That mirrors what we see in terms of jobs overall. The one region that stands out substantially different from that is Cape Cod. About 3% of the jobs in Cape Cod, of the state, are in Cape Cod. 6% of the leisure and hospitality ones are in Cape Cod. This is a higher concentration. This graphic is a little bit different. What we have here is a location quotient of the leisure and hospitality industry in each city and town in Massachusetts. So what's a location quotient? Location quotient is a measure of concentration of a characteristic or an industry within a local economy. So the percent of the leisure and hospitality industry in that city's economy over the state average. In instances where your location quotient is 1, the percent of your industry is the same in your local economy as it is in the state. So if everything were the same, the state would all be 1, right? But there are concentrations in some places over others. In instances when you're below 1, that means you have a lower concentration of that industry in your local economy. And in places where you're above 1, that indicates a high concentration. In this map, the greener it is, the more the concentration and the more important the leisure and hospitality industry is for that local economy. Unsurprisingly, it's really green on Cape Cod. It's really green in the Berkshires. And it's really green in the kind of North Shore, Greater Boston area. This indicates that the high concentrations and those darkest greens mean that there's 3 times the proportion of leisure and hospitality jobs in that local economy than the state average. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to demonstrate concentrations and importance of leisure and hospitality, but this is one of the cleanest. And we see, again, Cape Cod and the Berkshires as we would expect. So I already noted spinoff effects in the economy and the importance of leisure and hospitality relative to other sectors. We specialize at the Donahue Institute in economic impact analyses and do a lot of this work through a couple of computer programs, one called REMI, Regional Economic Modeling and Corporate, another IMPLAN, where you take direct information about an industry or a workforce or an investment and feed it into the model, and it estimates economic impacts related to other supply chain relationships. This allows us to tell an interesting story about the indirect and induced effects or the spin-off or ripple effects that happen in the economy. We use this work in a lot of different things, including with the Mass Gaming Commission, to estimate the impact of expanded gaming in the state. In the leisure and hospitality context, we have about 376,000 jobs, as already noted, but there's a multiplier effect in that employment of about 1.62, meaning that for these 376,000 jobs in the state, another 232,000 are supported through business-to-business spending, buying food from wholesale food distributors, and from consumer spending. Now the waitress has money in her pocket and she goes out to dinner with her friends. That money kicks back into the economy, or they go out and go shopping or whatever. The activities in leisure and hospitality help create directly $28 billion in economic activity in the state and support another $41 billion statewide. So we have our total impacts on the right-hand side with 608,000 total jobs supported by leisure and hospitality, and in $70 billion in economic activity. Okay, key takeaway 2. Leisure and hospitality workforce is among the most vulnerable and transient in any industry in the state, of any industry in the state. So what are the things we highlight there? Leisure and hospitality workers are young. They have limited educational attainment. I don't actually have a slide on educational attainment, but just for reference, 24% of the leisure and hospitality industry has a college degree compared to 47% of all other workers in the state. And about 17% have less than a high school diploma compared to 6% in all other industries. Workers are diverse and related. We have high concentrations of Latino and foreign-born workers. LHT workers earn less than other mass workers overall, and there are high concentrations of poverty within the industry. So let's break down some of these. So first, I already know the LHT industry is young. 57% of the leisure and hospitality industry is under the age of 35, compared to 1/3 of all other industries. This makes sense, and I think for a lot of folks, the leisure and hospitality industry ends up being the first entry point in the labor market for people. That said, there are older workers in the sector as well, 43% being older than 35. But it is generally a young workforce that relies heavily on people entering the labor market for the first time, picking up important soft skills. Okay, in terms of race and ethnicity, our location quotient is back. We're using it a little bit different here. But what we're looking at is the concentration of racial and ethnic groups within the leisure and hospitality industry compared to all other industries. In an instance where if the leisure and hospitality proportion for a racial group is the same as the state average, it would be 1. In instances where the concentration of a racial or ethnic group is higher in leisure and hospitality, it would be over 1. Okay, so what's the most telling thing here? The most telling thing is obviously the concentration of Latinos in the industry. About 14% of all workers in the LHT industry are Hispanic or Latino. That compares to 8% for all other industries in Massachusetts. So the industry relies heavily on folks from Hispanic and Latino backgrounds, and in particular, folks of the foreign-born communities. Looking here at the distribution of native-born and foreign-born, about a quarter of all workers in LHT are foreign-born, compared to about a fifth statewide. What's interesting, though, that there's some very different characteristics. Well, first, the not-so-different characteristics. Our foreign-born communities in Massachusetts, in particular Greater Boston, rely heavily come predominantly from Latin America, Central America, and from Asia. And that is consistent from all industries. What does stand out about leisure and hospitality is a few things. One, the workers in leisure and hospitality who are foreign-born tend to have very low educational attainment and more limited English-speaking skills. One thing that stands out a lot in Massachusetts is that we have a very bimodal distribution of our foreign-born population in terms of educational attainment. There's a stereotype sometimes of low-skilled workers, cleaning houses or whatever, and that part of the story is true, but it's not the whole story. Because of our high-skill industries, we have a lot of immigrants who come here to go to school and then stay and participate in the labor market. So we see that bifurcation when you look at leisure and hospitality compared to other industries. In terms of where folks are from, predominantly from China, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, are the main countries where foreign-born workers are coming from that are working in leisure and hospitality. Now, what stands out, though, is which industries foreign-born workers are centered in leisure and hospitality. What I have here, again, is our location quotient that looks at the concentration of native-born and foreign-born workers by different subsets of leisure and hospitality. And what we see is how much accommodation and food and beverage rely on foreign-born labor in order to staff their needs. So in accommodations case, there's twice the ratio of foreign-born workers in the industry compared to other sectors. Okay, so next, wages. We've already noted that 10% of the workers in Massachusetts work in leisure and hospitality, but it's the lowest paid industry in Massachusetts. What we see here, going left to right, are the ranking of major industries by wage, leisure and hospitality being on the far left, followed closely by retail. About the average salary in leisure and hospitality being around $28,000, or under, excuse me, I think this is where my eyes aren't so good. Right around $28,000. What's telling about this too is that while 10% of workers in Massachusetts work in leisure and hospitality, only 4% of the wages in the state are generated in leisure and hospitality. So it's a lot of low-wage labor, a lot of low-wage jobs in the industry. Now, the next slide though is it's not all entirely low wage. Here we have a distribution. We're switching data sources here. We moved the previous one was using data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This slide here leverages data from the American Community Survey, and we took workers who were in leisure and hospitality and other industries and split them by different income groupings. And what we see is that the blue, being leisure and hospitality, do have jobs across all income levels, although it is highly concentrated on the low end of the scale, with over 50% of the jobs requiring, with over 50% of the jobs paying less than $20,000 a year. Now, on the other hand, there are 3% that pay over $100,000. So there are high wage opportunities, but generally there are low wage opportunities in the industry. And that corresponds with this next point, is the amount of poverty concentration among workers in leisure and hospitality. About 11% of workers in leisure and hospitality live in a household that is in poverty. And what's an important point here is that it's not just a matter of their wages. The measurement of the measurement of poverty that we're using here from the American Community Survey takes into account household income. So even if your high school kid is working in leisure and hospitality, that's being counted in with the wages of the parents as well, to understand what the poverty rate is of that household. And what we see is that 4 times the proportion of workers in leisure and hospitality are living in a household in poverty than all other workers. In fact, 20% of all workers who are in poverty in Massachusetts work in leisure and hospitality. So earlier when when some of us were talking in the other room, Brian referred to these as kind of poverty jobs, and this is part of where we see this, is these low wage, and a lot of this is driven by part-time labor. 50% of the jobs in the industry are part-time, but what we do see here is this kind of quality of life issues that butt up against the industry. Okay, and third, despite being in a low-skill industry, there are significant challenges in maintaining a well-skilled labor force. Of the LHT jobs projected to become available through 2019, the vast majority require a high school diploma or less, about over 80%, but these jobs have high turnover, so there's a lot of pressure on employers to keep filtering new people in. And then high-skill jobs require some formal training. The high-skill jobs that require formal training are primarily in culinary, chef, head cooks, those kinds of things. So I'm going to be combining a few different data sources here. As I noted before, we did a survey with employers. We asked them the level of concern you have about potential challenges over the next 5 years and what things stood out. Well, the circle here hits on a couple of things. The biggest thing employers were worried about were healthcare costs. And this is common across all industries in Massachusetts. Healthcare costs are a significant challenge for everyone. And I feel like this is every time we do an industry study at the Donahue Institute, this ends up bubbling to the top. But the next several deal with issues of labor costs, available labor supply, and this one at the bottom, the fifth one down here, more restrictive immigration policy. And I think the Globe's run several stories over the last year about concerns about more restrictive federal policy and what that's going to mean for the labor supply, particularly in places like Cape Cod. But here, highlighting this concern from employers about available labor. We also asked employers, how challenging is it to hire and retain appropriately skilled employees for the following job types: management, front of the house, back of the house, and equipment or operations managers. And what stood out to us was this, that nearly 2/3 in all cases identified that finding and retaining appropriately skilled staff was very challenging. So it really stood out to us as like, here's an industry where we're finding that 80% of the jobs require a high school diploma or less. So there isn't this huge issue in terms of credentialing, right? But there's these huge problems with hiring and retaining people that for your jobs. Then we asked employers, over the past 5 years, how challenging have the following issues been in maintaining a well-staffed and appropriately skilled workforce? What bubbled to the top? The very challenging things, number one, local cost of living. As we've already noted in a few other places, Massachusetts is a high-cost state. Housing costs in particular, somebody who just bought a new house and selling another one, housing is really expensive out there. And particularly when it comes to housing that is connected to transportation and access to jobs. The second thing was available career ladders for workforce. There are limited opportunities at the middle and higher end of the industry, so then there are a lot of folks who are in this industry briefly and then move on to other places. One that I don't highlight here but keeps standing out to me, and I think it's just because of the amount of tension with the opioid epidemic, is the fourth one down, that addiction and substance abuse being 47% of the employers noting that as being very challenging for hiring and maintaining a well-staffed labor force. So opportunities in LHT. We do a section on the next 3 years of employment in the leisure and hospitality industry using state projections on employment growth for LHT. That is the blue bar there. What we see there is that annually we're estimating 6,400 jobs opening up in LHT. This is about a growth rate of 4.2% annually, which is faster than the state average of 2.7. So the industry is growing, and it matches the things that we saw in the other slides. But what's critically important here when we think about the job opportunities in LHT is the issue of turnover, and that's the orange bar. The orange bar here is the replacement rate effectively applied to every occupation in LHT. And what we find, and what is replacement rate? Replacement rate is the number of jobs that become permanently available because the person who used to have it leaves the industry. They either retire, which is more common, which is the way we normally talk about replacement rate in presentations like this, or because people permanently leave the industry because they're young and they get their college degree and they go do something else. And here we find that 60,000 jobs in LHT annually become available from people permanently leaving the labor force. A lot of these jobs, again, require limited educational attainment. In fact, the top 12 in terms of openings are all jobs that require a high school diploma or less, such as waiters, waitresses, bartending staff, and so on. Below that, though, are several occupations that get at issues of food preparation, cooks, and these kinds of things that in our conversations with employers, we note significant challenges in the future, particularly when things like the casinos come online. In Springfield, there's been a lot of concern about, hey, what's going to happen with line cooks as MGM opens up, and so there could be these like backfilling pressures that would occur within a local labor markets. So in terms of policy implications, we identify four main things, and I'll move quickly so that we can get to the panel conversation. The first is to better align LHT workforce with cost of living, training, and recruitment challenges. The core issue here is, and as I've already noted in several places, is the balance between low-wage work and a high-cost state, and what some of those challenges are. The most natural place that people will point to is, okay, well, let's increase the minimum wage. And there is a groundswell of attention now of increasing, the state minimum wage to $15 an hour, and then the folks who receive tips to $9 an hour. For large corporations, that may be absorbable, but we have a lot of small mom and pop type of operations in the leisure and hospitality industry, and that may be a challenge for those folks, which does raise, other policymakers bring up ideas of a training wage for younger workers and that kind of thing. Cost of living, though, is another important part of this. The Boston Foundation has done a ton of work in this space over the years, particularly around housing and the ability to build, and for the state to and municipalities to put more effort into building more housing and more affordable housing that's close to transportation and easier for workers to get around the state. This is a core issue for economic development in Massachusetts, regardless. You could talk about LHT or any industry or anything else. I sit on the Governor's Transportation Commission, and it's one of the things that I keep pointing to is this delicate nexus between housing, transportation, and economic development, and how far flung people need to be to find affordable housing in the state, and what kind of pressure points that creates. Improved LHT marketing funds and strategy. Industry leaders abound throughout our work, highlighted the fact that the state does not put a lot of resources into marketing and promoting LHT in Massachusetts. As a point of reference, New York spends $70 million on marketing the state as a tourist destination. Mass spends $10 million. And the funding for organizations like Mott and the RTCs have been in the crosshairs and been a tug of war for several years. There are some creative things that other places are doing, including creating districts where you do a small tax assessment on hotel rooms and using those dollars locally to help support marketing strategies, and it would be smart for the state to explore some of these ideas. level the competitive playing field in LHT. This is mainly about disruptive technologies when we noted this, and things like Airbnb. Several of our municipalities are starting to wrestle with this, but the pressures on employers of, hey, there's folks that are renting out rooms and they're not paying taxes, and it's hampering our ability to be competitive with them. On the other hand, as one of the folks that we interviewed noted, young people use Airbnb. So this kind of balancing act between, bringing disruptive technologies in the fold while also acknowledging where they're bringing new people into the space. And lastly, control rising costs of doing business in the LHT industry. Cost of business concerns were critical and have been critical in a number of industry studies we've done. Things that came up in particular for LHT, availability of broadband service and high-speed internet. It is surprising when you live in eastern Massachusetts just how much of the state doesn't have high-speed internet and what kind of challenge that presents for economic development in places, particularly ones that require the internet for posting things on TripAdvisor and so on. The second one that's surprising is the amount of lack of sewer coverage around the state. And so for restaurants that use a lot of water, being on septic systems can be very costly. And then, of course, already noting the healthcare costs from earlier. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn the show over to Keith. And happy to stick around and answer any questions after or after the panel gets to talk.
Good morning. I'm Keith Mahoney. I'm the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs here at the Boston Foundation. I'd like to ask our panelists to join us on the stage. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to recognize Tom Kershaw, who's joined us, who's the chair of the State Advisory Committee on Travel and Tourism. Thanks for being here, Tom. And I also, while they're getting settled, just through a show of hands, how many people in this room had their first job in the leisure, hospitality, and tourism industry? So this is a very unscientific data point, but it does demonstrate the ubiquity and the importance of the sector, which was one of my takeaways from the report. And I'm going to ask the panelists the same thing. So starting to my far left, delighted to see Mayor Kim Driscoll here. Mayor Driscoll is serving her 4th term as mayor of Salem and is the first woman to hold that position. An attorney who believes in the power of local government, Kim has served as a chief legal counsel for the city of Chelsea as it was emerging from receivership and was later promoted to deputy city manager. She served on the Salem City Council and then ran for mayor successfully in 2005. As mayor, she has professionalized city government, improved the city's bond rating, and made investments in the schools and the revitalization of Salem's historic downtown waterfront. Next to Mayor Driscoll, Jill Griffin, who is the Director of Workforce, Supplier, and Development at the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, where she is responsible for the promotion of diversity and programs to encourage all residents to benefit from the gaming expansion. Jill was previously a very valued colleague of ours here at the Boston Foundation as a Senior Director of Programs, and before that she held various leadership positions at the BRA and the City of Boston. Next, we have Wendy Northcroft, who's been with the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce since 1997 and served as CEO since 2002. In addition to this work, she's the co-founder of the John F. Kennedy Hyannis Museum and continues to serve on the foundation board as well as several other boards, including the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, the Cape and Islands Workforce Development Board, and the Job Training and Employment Corps. Her commitment to promoting Cape Cod businesses is demonstrated by her willingness to be here and not there today. Last, we have Brian Lang, who has been president of Unite Here Local 26 since 2011. The union has grown to 10,000 hospitality, hotel, and food service, airport, and concession workers in Boston and Rhode Island. He's also vice president of the 290,000 member international Unite Here. He has more than 35 years of experience in the labor movement, including as a bellman at the Sheraton Boston and as a chief shop steward at the now closed Colonial Meatpacking Plant in Boston. Brian sits on the MBTA's Fiscal Management Control Board and the Massachusetts Gaming Policy Advisory Committee. As Paul noted earlier, we were unfortunate that Jim Rooney got stuck in Nashville, but Brian has graciously agreed to speak on his behalf all morning. So would you please join me in welcoming the panel. So starting with Mayor Driscoll, what are some of your takeaways from the report, some things that surprised you or didn't surprise you?
I would say, as a mayor in a community that really relies on tourism, it's our #1 industry, there were not many surprises. I think it reinforces, one, the desire to make sure we're thinking about tourism as a job market. When we think about life sciences or tech or biosciences, or we right away think about jobs. I'm not sure we have the same perspective with respect to the tourism and hospitality industry. We think of Salem as the 3rd most visited destination in Massachusetts. There's Boston, there's Cape Cod, and history is really our stock and trade. And that certainly brings the tourism and hospitality community for us into an economic sector. It's putting jobs on people's table. It's putting food on people's table, and we've known that for a really long time, trying to support that effort with respect to ensuring that it's not looked at like a dead-end position, or the feeling that people have about tourism and hospitality is not one that's creating jobs. And yet we know in our community, by reinvesting our promotion and marketing dollars, 50% of our hotel motel tax revenues go back into promoting our community. We've seen a 75% increase in hotel growth. That's jobs. That's commercial tax revenue. That's really important to our local economy. We weren't doing that 10 years ago. So we've seen the return on investment on our local community level. I do think it would be helpful if we could have some strategies at the state level as well. And then how do we support that underbelly in terms of the jobs? There's a help wanted sign in every single restaurant, every single hospitality industry in our community right now. And there's not enough trained workforce to really support the demands that exist. So I love the fact that we're actually looking at this as an industry that's real dollars for people who live in my community and live, I think, across the Commonwealth, and recognize that's an industry that needs to be supported and think about it that way. So I'm looking forward to certainly taking the findings of this report and thinking about how we can collectively put strategies together to support that industry and those who work in it.
Jill.
There weren't too many surprises, but there were many things that were confirmed for me. I was one of the people that raised their hand in terms of the first job, and I also worked through college as a bartender. But one of the things I wanted to clarify was that Plainridge Park Casino is part of this study, and this is 500 jobs down in Plainville, a slots-only parlor. But what isn't included as part of this study are the 2 large resort casinos that are online. And I can talk more about that later. We've been really aware of the difficulty, especially in food and beverage, and we've been working for a long time to put workforce development dollars and other initiatives out there. So,
Wendy, we saw how green the Cape was in that location quotient. Yeah. What were your takeaways from the report?
So I finished reading the report last night and woke up this morning. I had all my little comments, but I woke up this morning. So what an amazing industry, extremely resilient, every corner of the Commonwealth, and it has the power to transform someone's day. So just by the mere act of somebody interacting with you, showing care, showing love, you walk out of a restaurant having a better experience. You walk out of a resort saying, wow, I'm going back. And so I think that there's a whole qualitative portion of the study that it's hard to quantify that, but love to see the quantification, love to have it rationalized as being a real industry. Cape Cod Chamber was formed about 100 years ago to create a tourism industry on Cape Cod. The state was very concerned about what was going to happen to Cape Cod. There'd been a huge outmigration of people. Fishing was collapsing, agriculture was collapsing. The state thought Cape Cod would become a vast wasteland. what to do with it. So there was a state report that said perhaps tourism would be a way for people to make a living, and I think we nailed it 100 years later. Thanks.
Brian.
I just want to echo what Wendy just said, and you gave a good demonstration of what hospitality is with your presentation and your attitude. And believe it or not, it takes a tremendous amount of skill. I used to say to my daughter as she was growing up, there's really two kinds of smarts. There's book smarts and there's street smarts. Both are very important. And the street smarts of the hospitality industry is the motor behind it, and it's the workforce and the kind of attitude that Wendy just displayed. The report, no big surprises. I'm thrilled that it's out because what it does is it gives the industry the proper status in the state, and it's going to generate the kind of conversation that we need to have. And what I would really like to focus on, and most of what I will talk about today, is that no job is ordained a low-wage job or a high-wage job. Think about that. When my grandparents were alive, manufacturing jobs were low-wage jobs. When I was growing up, they were good, family-sustaining jobs. In my neighborhood, people were proud to work in the auto plant, were proud to work at the brewery. I grew up in New Jersey by the Budweiser Brewery. Were proud to work with their hands, and one job was enough to sustain a family. I believe that the same can be true with the hospitality industry. We've got examples of it in accommodations. We've got examples of it in food and beverage in and around the Boston area, which I'm very excited about talking about. And it will be no surprise to anybody here when you hear this next statement. The most effective anti-poverty program that I have come across in my life are unions. It's too bad Jim Rooney isn't here, because Jim and I actually have collaborated when he was the head of the Convention Center Authority. And through that collaboration and a vision, the food and beverage workers who work at the convention centers in Boston some of them are at that $100,000 range. Many of them are in the $50,000, $60,000 range, and they've got good health care, very affordable health care, and they can sustain their families on those jobs. So there's a lot of examples that I'll talk about today where that's possible in this industry.
We'll definitely get back to wages and training and the mobility ladders in the industry, but I want to pick up on something that Jill mentioned. The report doesn't really focus on the emerging gaming industry. It does anticipate 7,500 jobs across the 3 casinos, Plainridge, MGM Springfield, and Encore Boston Harbor. Can you tell us a little bit about the quality of those jobs, what you're expecting in terms of the workforce and the training that they'll be provided?
Sure. So I'll just back up and say part of the selection process of our casino licensees was to look at how these casinos would support the existing tourism industry, what their job quality was like, and those were some of the criteria that they were judged on. So just to give you an example, MGM in Springfield is hiring 3,000 employees. They've made a commitment to hire 35% Springfield residents. Those are great quality jobs with benefits. On this side of the state, Encore Boston Harbor will hire upwards of 4,500 workers with great wages and benefits. And you can find out more about this because each of the casinos is required to put together and get approved by the commission a workforce development plan where they demonstrate the career ladders that exist within the industry. They demonstrate how they're going to recruit and train their workforce. The commission has recently approved Encore Boston Harbor's workforce development plan, and earlier this year approved MGM Springfield's plan.
Great. So touch a little bit on, we talked about training, and I want to, Brian, turn to you, because one of the things that Mark pointed out is the high number of Latinos, especially in the hospitality industry. And I know that Local 26 has an excellent training program with BEST. Can you talk about that a little bit, and how English as a second language instruction can help career ladders, and how that allows people to move forward in their careers?
Sure. Well, first of all, the training center, what people often talk about is, where do we get the funds to train? Well, we have, this is another area of collaboration. There's 34 hotels in the Boston area that are, where the workers are represented by Local 26. And when we negotiate our contracts, we negotiate one pot of money, and then year over year, the employers know for certain what their labor costs are going to be. The union and the union workers decide what to do with that money. So for every hour worked by every employee, 14 cents goes into a training and education fund. It accumulates about $1 million a year. So it's funded through the contract. The employers pay the employees choose to put it in a training fund. And there's 6 levels of English. There's computer literacy classes. There's professional server classes and culinary arts classes. And through that, immigration classes for citizenship. And through that, and it's all free, except for that 14 cents an hour. So it's not really free. Let me just tell you a story. I'm thinking about one of our members, an employee over at the Omni Parker House. She came to this country from Cape Verde, spoke very little English, was a housekeeper, worked a couple of jobs actually. She took advantage of the English classes, took the professional server class once her English was at a certain level, started to pick up shifts in that hotel as a casual banquet server. Eventually got promoted to become a full-time banquet server. Today she owns her own home. She was a single parent. She put her 2 daughters through college, and she's still a professional banquet server, probably making somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. It's the so-called American dream, and we've been able to do that as a union, working in collaboration with the best hospitality employers in New England.
So it's good that, I'm going to shift a little bit. You mentioned collaboration, so I'll take that cue. We live in a Commonwealth that has very limited home rule, and the legislature is a really important partner for any local official to get things done. We had close to 200 mayors in town last week for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and many are seeing local governments as more important than ever to really take action. Mayor Driscoll, what can local officials do to foster a strong leisure and hospitality industry?
Yeah, really good question. And 200 mayors, I mean, that's nothing, right? We need more than that. You know, I think that one of the things we've done in Salem that I think was really effective within our own community, several years ago, tourism and hospitality, there was a little bit of rub between residents and visitors, right? Is this industry good for me? There's traffic. I can't get into my favorite restaurant. You know, some of the things you love about living in a tourism community is that you always have activities going on, but it can also have some impacts. Our community started doing one simple thing. On the bottom of checks that any industry or business in the tourism industry was sending out, in the memo section, they put paid for by tourism dollars. So the hardware store, the graphic artist, all the folks who don't think of themselves necessarily as benefiting from the tourism and hospitality industry or part of that industry, lights started going off like, oh, wait a second, you know, even though I'm not directly employed by that particular sector, there is benefits to me. That really started to have a shift in our community. Recognizing that tourism and hospitality, yeah, it's your first job, or it's helping you get through college, or it's filling a niche, but it's definitely, creating an economic boom within our community, especially a place that we're not off 128. We don't have large manufacturing base. We're not making widgets and sending them to market. History is our stock and trade. Tourism, having fun and festivals and coming to our community actually can generate jobs. So that's one small thing, talking it up, acknowledging it's an industry and doing everything you can to support it. I think too, it is a little bit of a struggle when you don't have as much authority or control. I'll bring up short-term rentals. We've got an ordinance and a home rule petition pending with the state to make sure our short-term rentals, Airbnb, hosts made $100,000 in Salem in the month of October alone. So think about just the incredible bump that's having. But it's undermining some of our traditional hotels and Airbnbs. We immediately put in place a short-term rental lodging excise tax, just like we have on the other folks. That's been in the legislature for several months now. Trying to have policies that are consistent at our level that work for us sometimes takes a longer path when you're dealing with a state government and not having that much home rule authority. I do think we can highlight these items, what we can do locally. We're still filing those bills. We're still pushing for those sorts of activities. I think the last component is on the workforce training. We're fortunate to have a nonprofit in our community known as Root, relatively new organization that's working with high school graduates on training them for workforce issues in the restaurant and hospitality industry. They have a 12-week program, you get a certification, you're served safe, and other key components. They provide experience both on the front of the house and the back of the house, and they provide externships in all of our local restaurants and other attractions, primarily restaurants. They're in the food service part of the industry. Wonderful way for all of our restaurants that are in need of work to have somebody who's coming in and have some training, teaching those soft skills, understanding what it takes to be on the front line or in the back of the house, so to speak. And also recognizing that we want to treat that industry as something that's important in our community. Those sorts of partnerships in terms of workforce training, providing a pathway for a young person who may not know exactly what they want to do, we're supporting that effort. Finding other ways to both fund and advocate for state dollars and local dollars to help support those are things that are high on my list to try and overcome the things that are not in our control, for sure.
Yes, I was turning to you next, Wendy.
Well, I just want to clarify something about the short-term rental tax. So, because I think Provincetown had been filing the same legislation for 11 years in a row, but this year the House and then the Senate both passed what we call the short-term rental bill. It is in conference committee now. I think the conferees have been trying to solve all the other problems of Massachusetts at the same time, but there will be a level playing field against the hotel industry that has to. We have some of the highest taxes in the Commonwealth on the tourism industry, but this will level the playing field against the online travel experiences that we're going tax-free. Cape Cod is in the top 10 Airbnb markets in the country, and so we work very hard to see that happen. We don't want to end it. We want parity. We want to be able to actually leverage some of that new tax revenue to pay for our wastewater issues. Mm-hmm. But there will be short-term rental tax in the near future. They're just kind of trying to reconcile the differences, which also include empowering the municipalities to figure out the regulations.
One other thing on that. I agree with what Wendy just said. I'm very excited about that development on the state level. And the other thing that's really important about what's happening on the state level is that it looks like the local option is going to be available, which means one size doesn't necessarily fit all. You may need a different ordinance in Salem, a different one on the Cape, a different one in Boston. One just got passed in Boston that's going to severely limit the investor units that can go on the market. And I know one of the issues that's raised is a major one is housing costs. Well, that's going to put 2,000 units of housing back out on the market, which will help at least contain the housing costs in a city like Boston.
So I go ahead, Jill.
So this is a little bit, earlier this year, the gaming law has some of the most restrictive restrictions against who can work in the casino. And some of the non-gaming positions actually required that, or excluded you from working in a casino if you had committed certain crimes, even within the last 10 years. And the legislature listened. There were concerns out in Springfield initially about the ability to hire folks in some of these fields like culinary that are traditionally open and gives people a second chance. And so the legislature actually filed an amendment to the gaming law that allows the commission to exempt certain positions from registration. So it opens up these opportunities to a whole new population.
Right, that's very important, considering that the legislature passed major legislation around reentry and criminal justice reform, and a key part of that is having people employed and fully integrated back in the community. So I'll stay with you, Jill, for 1 second on the on one of the training programs, in particular the Culinary Arts program that the Boston Foundation was pleased to award Holyoke Community College with the Patrick Prize around their culinary training program. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Holyoke Community College has partnered with MGM and others to build a brand new hospitality training center right in the heart of Holyoke. HCC previously had a hospitality school. They had one small kitchen. Now they have 5. So this is the HCC MGM Hospitality School. I'd also like to just add that in the last 2 years, through our Community Mitigation Fund, we've put out $1.5 million for both adult basic education and workforce training dollars focused on occupations that are in line with the casino jobs.
Great. So we kind of skirted around the issue of state and budget and legislation because that was kind of rocked a little bit yesterday, so I don't really want to get into that. But I do want to talk about another big issue, particularly one that's on the Cape, which is finding seasonal workforce in a competitive environment, which was an issue even before the recent changes in federal immigration policy and limitation of H-2B visas. Wendy, what are you hearing from employers about this season and what they're doing?
I think this is as tight as it's ever been. I've been in this business about 30 years, and employers are saying, I've never seen it quite so challenging. Here's a good example. So Provincetown has about 3,000 people that live year-round in Provincetown, right? The tip. In the summer, there can be 60,000 people in Provincetown. So everyone that wants a job in Provincetown in the hospitality industry basically has a job. You fill up all the jobs, and where do you go? Next town over. Well, Truro has even fewer people living in Truro. So you look at our geographic isolation, which is a huge problem. Never mind, it's all a national park out there, so we're not really developing any new housing or infrastructure. Our transportation is minimal. So in the Outer Cape, the islands particularly, there has been a struggle for a long time. High demand, low number of workers, and you add to that the fact that we are the 4th oldest county in the country. People move to Cape Cod older. They have the means to move there. They have the means to retire. They have the means to not have to work. So now we have 214,000 souls on Cape Cod. 27% of them are 65 years or older. We look the way America's going to look not too distant future. So those folks don't have to be in the workforce and probably choose not to be unless they're the starter at the golf course or doing some cool thing at a museum. Very physical jobs that are required. There's physicality to the landscaping, physicality to housekeeping, physicality to the back of the house and the kitchen. So where do you turn in a place that has very few young people? We've become extremely dependent on visa programs over the years. Now with the new policy changes at the federal level, restricting immigration, that's become extremely challenging to get the share of visas. Cape Cod historically was using 15% of the H-2B visa program allotment to begin with. So now what do we do? So right now we have employers that are providing housing. if you want a second job, we got a place for you to live. They're providing cars and transportation. They're luring mature workers back into the workforce. We've started this year a program with a group out of Canada that's leveraging FOMO, fear of missing out, going to high unemployment regions of the country, engaging young people young 18 to 30, to come together to the Cape for the summer to work. That pilot program will have 60 employees this year successfully placed. We've been interacting quite heavily with the U.S. territories, particularly Puerto Rico, to try to create a work share program. The Ritz, the Waldorf Astoria, they have furloughed workers for 2 years while they rebuild. They don't want to lose those employees, but maybe we can give them employment on a temporary basis. We have opposite seasons. We're working like the Dickens on immigration reform. It's getting worse, not better. People are opening later in the season and closing earlier in the season. They're retiring. They're just the property is worth more. The real estate is worth more than the business, so they're putting that on the market. They're offering points to customers to forego housekeeping. We'll give you an extra credit if you don't do housekeeping every day. They're closing bedrooms. They're closing dining tables. They're looking at technology in the not too distant future. I think you'll see more service being ordered through an iPad. You can also make your credit card transaction right there. And I think that we're looking to certainly pay more overtime, stay through the season bonuses. And I've got an employer who was parking the cars at a major event the other night. I've got executive vice presidents that are pushing vacuum cleaners. Everyone's pitching in and doing the work. But it's really been extremely challenging in a way that hasn't been in a long time for regions to get geographic isolation and our demographics working against us.
So if anyone wants a second job,
Come on down.
Wendy will be here after the
telling you.
forum.
Housing, transportation,
I have just a question.
drinks on the
In
beach.
terms of workers, like the decline in the numbers, what's the number that?
So, that's a great question. So Cape Cod has, and we get into the part-time, we look at seasonal. You're talking about part-time work, we look at seasonal work. 100,000 people work year-round on Cape Cod. In the summertime, in order to fill that peak, because we are a beach destination in New England, try as I may, January is a hard sell. So the 15,000 jobs that are added for peak season, anywhere from 20 to 15,000 jobs are added in the peak season. We can fill pretty much all but 5,000 of them. This year, it looks like the number is about 5,000 positions that are going begging. Yeah.
So Brian, this brings to mind something that you and I talked about. The report notes the durability of the hospitality sector, but it appears that the food and beverage sector has recovered their employment levels faster than the hospitality. Has there been a change in staffing models in the hotel industry that you've seen?
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed the report doesn't really reflect is how lucrative the accommodation sector is, the hotel sector is. The margins are a lot better than in the food and beverage. And what happened was in 2009, during the Depression, employers did what they could in the hotels to try to mitigate the lower occupancies, and that meant that figuring out ways of getting more work done with fewer employees, and that, along with some other changes in the industry, has meant that, yes, just recently employment levels have come up to 2001, but the thing that the report doesn't reflect is that the profit levels in the hotel industry are through the roof. They're really real estate holdings these days, and their resale value is based on keeping costs down, and the greatest cost is labor costs, right? And so you'll notice that it's a very hot real estate market for hotels. Hotels are bought and sold on a regular basis. So, what was the question? I had my own agenda. Okay.
The question is, what do you think about the convention center expansion, Jim? No, it was about the staffing levels in.
The staffing levels in the hotels, like it used to be a metric on like a full-service hotel, there'd be 2 employees to every room. It's much closer to 1 employee to every room now. So that accounts more for than a lack of rebound. The industry has way rebounded and is doing very, very well. If you look at room rates, if you look at RevPAR, continues to increase. RevPAR, by the way, is a metric of occupancy and average daily room rate, and one gets divided into the other, and you come up with a figure, and that's what the industry uses. It continues to rise, but isn't rising tremendously, but because of the getting more done with fewer workers, the margins are there. So it's doing very well. Let me say one thing, though, because I want to...
You get to say 2 things all morning.
Okay.
And they don't have to agree with each other.
So I told you the story about the woman over at the Omni Parker House and the career ladder. But the majority of the workforce that comes in as housekeepers stay as housekeepers. And in the unionized hotels, there's a very low turnover. And you can see that's a problem in the industry. And I look at it, I say, yeah, well, if they're poverty jobs, of course there's going to be turnover. We have the average age of the workforce in the unionized hotels is between 45 and 50. That's the average age. A housekeeper makes close to $22 an hour. Free family health insurance, a defined benefit pension plan, free legal services, a housing program, the education and training program that I just described to you. People stay in those jobs because they're approaching the types of jobs that I referred to earlier that my neighbors worked at when I was growing up in manufacturing. I believe that the different sectors of the industry are different. The margins aren't the same in restaurants as they are in hotels. The rooms, the margins are much greater. But let me give you an example in the industrial food service. We represent thousands of workers that work on college campuses, in dining halls, in food courts. Those jobs are typically considered poverty jobs. Northeastern University, the workers there organized, about 400 workers organized into the union in 2011. When they started their organizing campaign, a typical food service worker on that campus made between $8 and $10 an hour on affordable health insurance. So they were on mass health. We were paying for their health insurance. They're in their second contract cycle. Every 4 or 5 years we negotiate a new contract. By the end of this contract, the lowest paid worker is going to make $20 an hour. Cooks are going to make $25 an hour. They have health insurance. They have a defined benefit pension plan. We had a strike over at Harvard, the richest nonprofit, except for the Catholic Church in the world. And they could definitely afford to pay a full-time worker a minimum of $35,000 a year. The workers decided that that was important to them, and they went on strike for 3 weeks. They won $35,000 a year. And so that's the kind of standard that we've set on college campuses. And as I said, we represent workers on many college campuses. A little different than hotels, but the industries are all consolidating and becoming controlled by big corporations, in many cases multinational. Food service, Aramark's at Exo and Compass. 15, 20 years ago, there were a lot of little, even people would call them mom and pop operations. They've gotten gobbled up there. The hotel industry, forget it. Marriott is just bought up Starwood, which was one of the second, I think it was the second largest hotel. Marriott opens up a hotel every 14 hours around the world. Every 14 hours. Marriott is the dominant player in this city. We're in contract negotiations with them right now. So Restaurants, yeah, there are a lot of mom and pops. But has anybody ever heard of Darden? Darden is a restaurant company. You may recognize Capitol Grill, Longhorn Steakhouse, Yard House, Olive Garden. They've got 200,000 employees in the United States. That's a restaurant company. That's the way of this industry. So the money is there, ultimately. The most effective way of shifting some of that back into our communities, because that's what it means for workers to get good wages, good health care, be able to retire with dignity. The only way I've found to be able to do that is for people to get organized and to be able to challenge these major corporations around what they care about most. Harvard, it really is a major corporation that does some education on the side. But we challenged them on their image, right? We challenged Harvard's image. Dishwashers, immigrants, people who felt like they didn't have the right to say, wait a minute, I deserve more. But they got together and eventually said, yeah, maybe I deserve more, and brought an institution like Harvard to its senses to do the right thing. I wish it was easier than that, but it's what it takes. It's what it takes. It's what it's taken in the hotel industry. It's what it's taken on the campuses. It's what it takes at Fenway Park, where we represent 1,000 workers. So I wish there was an easier way. And if somebody has a better idea, I'd like to hear it.
Well, Jill wanted to chime in, and then Wendy.
So today, in the western part of our state, MGM has rented out the convention center, the Mass Mutual Center, and they have a mass hiring event where at the end of the day, they will extend hundreds of job offers. So they are hiring for their 200 line level cooks, for their hotel, their security staff. And for more than a year, probably 2 years, they've been out in the community working with nonprofits in the community, trying to get the word out about these great jobs. But I have to say it's a challenge. On this side of the state, Encore Boston Harbor will hire more than 1,400 food and beverage workers and more than 800 hotel workers. They will be working with the career centers. They will have satellite career support hubs with organizations like the Urban League and Chelsea Collaborative. So hiring is hard work, getting the word out to the right people, and but that's what needs to happen.
Wendy.
I just wanted to punctuate the comment about the wages. So the Cape has primarily small businesses, 8,000 companies, only 77 have more than over 100 employees. So it's very small. My employers have told me consistently the last several years, it's been a long time since we've paid anybody minimum wage. In fact, $15 to $20 an hour, it's tending to be the average, and that's based on scarcity and demand and small employers. And our employers have been told by recruiters that have been working with us in Puerto Rico, they place people all over the United States. They keep calling me saying, who else have you got? Because Cape Cod pays so well, we want to send our folks to Cape Cod.
Before we get to questions from the audience, I want to get to one other issue, which is public transit, which came up as a really important issue for the survey respondents. Mayor, I want to ask you to talk about the importance of public transit and what the second ferry can mean to Salem.
Sure. It's a timely topic because it took me an hour and 50 minutes to get here this morning. and Salem is 15 miles north of Boston. So, you know, Salem right now is the busiest commuter rail stop in the entire commuter rail system for the MBTA. We also have a seasonal ferry that operates from May through Halloween. We have a second ferry we just received a grant for that we'll be putting into service that we hope will be able to bring folks from Salem into the Seaport District and also look at some longer destinations like P-Town and others. 90 minutes from Salem to P-Town via boat. Like, seems like a way better option, right? I can only say that I think transportation for us is a lifeblood. Half of our residents leave Salem to go to work, half of the residents stay in Salem to come to work. So our commuter traffic has people leaving and people coming in. We're the county hub. Obviously, we just talked about the hospitality and tourism industry. The congestion that we're seeing in our community is really impacting potential growth. It's hand-to-hand combat to try and get new projects done. I mentioned those 75% increase in hotel rooms, but it's getting harder because you cannot get from one community to the next. It's certainly impacting people's ability to come into Boston, where we're seeing this intense growth, and it's impacting the cost of housing. We need to have a transportation system that works, not just for local communities, but for the business community, for certainly the folks who are at an economic scale. There's a ladder within hospitality, but those entry-level jobs, it's costly to take the commuter rail. That's the only system we have right now. And it certainly isn't always the frequency that you necessarily need, particularly if you're in the hospitality industry, a second shift. It's really meant for a 9 to 5 market, and we're busy. So it would be great to see investments in our transportation system that allows more frequent travel, expanded hours, and at an affordable rate. This morning we're talking about increasing parking fees in MBTA lots. A Zone 3 pass out of Salem is almost $300 a month. And we're the #1 stop, so we sell a lot of them. There are people using it, but it's a real hardship unless we figure out not only making it more affordable and more frequent, but also the east-west. We have a lot of people within our region in the North Shore. If you're trying to go from Salem to work in Cumming Center in Beverly, 2 miles away, it can take you 25 minutes to drive there, and you don't have another alternative. So we're also trying to do our part on the regional level to think about regional transit shuttle options, you know, partnering on all of the last mile. Complete streets are a policy that we've had for many years, looking at those alternative options and then supporting it with the infrastructure and the costs. We need a strong partner, you know, to do that both at the state and the federal government. But I can't say enough about transportation having a major impact on our local economy for better or for worse. And it's really critical that we continue to invest and find ways to improve what we're currently doing.
Brian, the mayor mentioned second shift workers, and something that we've heard a lot about in Greater Boston is late night service. It's been piloted, it's been discontinued, and often it's been billed as a way for, you know, college students and 20-somethings to enjoy the nightlife. But it's really important to people working night shifts. How important is that to your?
It's critical. It's critical. And there's a new pilot, by the way, that seems
Just
to
bus
be getting
rather than rail, right?
bus. Yes, this is in Boston, and it's going later into the early morning and then starting earlier, and it's really geared toward the workforce. The major thing that we see, actually, is that because of housing costs, more and more of the hospitality workforce who works in the city of Boston is living further and further out, as far away as New Bedford. I know of people that are driving in from New Bedford. So it's a critical issue. I don't think that there's an easy fix. I completely agree with Mayor Driscoll that it will take dollars. And, you know, look, our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure has been neglected for decades, and we're living with that now. I'm on this Fiscal Management Control Board. By the way, I was the only person that had no experience with transportation and no background in finance who was put on it. But the governor said that, to his credit, the reason he wanted me on it is that I represented more people who are dependent on the transportation system than anybody he knows. And it's been like a crash course. The system, the commuter rail system, has been a nightmare. The locomotives have been in dire need of repair and replacement. Cars have been. Similarly, the red line, the orange line are going to get we're going to get completely new systems there in the next 3 or 4 years. And the bus system, with all of the traffic going up, we have to look at things like municipalities partnering on making dedicated bus lanes, having a technology that traffic signals will immediately change when a bus shows up to make the experience a much more efficient one. But at the end of the day, we need more funds, both federal and state. We cannot expect the MBTA to fund itself at the levels that need to be funded in order to remake our transportation system, and it's absolutely critical for the economic good of the region. So,
All right, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience now, and I want to start with Pat right here. Please, may I ask you to ask a question that ends with a question mark, and and do use the microphone. We are live streaming this, so we want to record your comments.
Okay, good morning. I'm Pat Muscatolo, and I'm the CEO of the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau. And quick thank you to the Boston Foundation for doing this. It's hard to believe, 27 years that the industry hasn't been looked at. So it's very appropriate, and Mark and the team at the Donahue Institute did a great job. One of the comments when Mark mentioned the disparity in funding levels for tourism promotion, where the state of New York was like 70 million, I think you said, and it's 10 million for Massachusetts. So the good news is there are models out there that are being looked at, and I know you mentioned the Tourism Marketing District as one, and the Secretary Ash and his team are looking at a public-private model. So, but the key is, what can we do to recruit elected officials? And I'm looking at Mayor Driscoll because she's done such a great job in Salem with Destination Salem and with Kate and that team. What can we do to engage and get elected officials at the local level to work with us to convince the legislature that, it's crazy to just think that this industry is going to continue to produce money and jobs without support for marketing and promotion, because Colorado thought that, and they went, boy, did they fall quickly when they stopped their funding level. So what is it would you recommend that we should all be doing?
For me, I think the data is critical. That's certainly, we in Salem, as I indicated, have 50% of our hotel motel tax funds going to Destination Salem, our destination marketing organization. That's a public-private partnership, so it's not just funded by the city. As a result of that investment, we've seen an increase in hotel rooms. That's 75% increase. We've seen an increase in hotel motel taxes. That means more people are coming in Salem, spending the night, and that means they're spending more money. We know just the group tour industry alone is responsible for $30 million of expenditures within our community. That's almost 300 jobs. Yet it's really hard for us to build a strong case for tourism and hospitality. I think people view it as fun stuff, not necessarily the jobs that we're talking about. When we think about tech or life sciences or bioengineering, right away dollar signs go over folks' heads and they think about jobs. When we think about tourism and hospitality, and let's talk about what's happening in downtowns like mine. Cafe economy is strong. Retail's really struggling, but we've got restaurants and coffee shops, and people want fun activities to do and experiences. Every single mall is turning into an experience. And that's what's bringing people there, because you can push a button on your phone and have something delivered to your house. It's critical that we recognize that what seems like a fun industry that we enjoy still needs dollars to support it. We know that when we don't invest in tourism, we didn't have to make the investments we're making. There are other destinations within Massachusetts, within New England, that people can make choices. And I think for us to not recognize as a state, we've got history, that's not changing. We've got some pretty special things, amazing beaches, right? That's not gonna change, but we still need to promote it and market what's happening here, because other destinations are doing that. And they're going to eat our lunch, especially when you think about the international tourism and the difficulties, I think, that are going forward with recruiting people to come here or marketing folks to come to our community. It needs that data, though. And I will also say, I think the tourism industry needs to be smarter about how we're spending money. I know some of these fistfights that are happening at the state level, have nothing to do with not wanting to support tourism and really how those dollars are being expended. And I think as an industry, we need to get smart and understand what some reform measures we might need to take on as an industry to help advocate for increased dollars.
Jill?
If I could just add, when the full resort casinos are operational, 25% of their gross gaming revenue will go to support tourism and other things. So for example, 1% of the taxes collected will go to the Mass Tourism Trust Fund, 2% to the Mass Cultural Council, 9.5% will go to a gaming economic development fund that will be about $20 to $24.5 million when fully funded. This is a fund that could support regional tourism promotional agencies, workforce development. It needs to be appropriated by the legislature. So that could be a solution.
Can I just follow up on that? 'Cause
Yes.
that's a key thing. Your
Just wait for the microphone. Thanks.
One of your commissioners, Bruce Stebbins, did an amazing job in putting together the case for why that should happen.
Yes.
But it fell on deaf ears in the last month with the legislature. So, that money wasn't appropriated. So there it is, as you said, and it could, in the next couple of years grow to be 25 million that could be put to work to promote the industry so that, as Mayor Driscoll said, the competitive cities and destinations don't eat our lunch. But again, it keeps coming back. We
Right.
have to do a better job, I guess, of convincing the legislature to take action and to invest in the industry.
And perhaps some folks in the room with a public policy agenda could support that.
I don't know who you're talking to, Jill. Wendy.
I agree with you, Pat, of course, but I think that with this study and this report and showing the preponderance of part-time employment, we know we can grow those jobs. We can turn part-time into full-time. I can change January, February, March from the dreaded 100 days to really cool stuff going on because it doesn't have to happen at the beach. But we need the resources to do that. And as marketing, it's not just marketing, it's product development. It's helping new attractions come online. It's helping with housing and transportation networks. All of that can help be paid for through a highly taxed industry. We just have to feed it. Someone once said to us at the State House, we're really good at spending money up here. We really don't know how to make money. But we do. We know how to turn consumer desire on and off and compete in it's a very competitive global marketplace. So I think that we need to take some of this data and show here's some opportunity. Here's how we can grow this.
Just one thing. I think the success that we're having on a short-term rental agenda is instructive in some ways. It's really on a political level the first time that our union has really partnered with the industry effectively. And we should look at it that this is a political question. And I agree that we need the data. I think the return on investment will be indisputable. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of agendas up there. And if we could get ourselves together and, I think between us, we do things politically pretty well, we could be a little bit more of a powerhouse up there. So it's kind of a olive branch, Pat, that I'd like to talk in those terms, how we can support the industry together.
Pat mentioned Colorado, and that reminded me of a question I got from Twitter that, Mark, if you're brave enough, you can address. Did we consider the marijuana industry as leisure and tourism? And Colorado has seen some growth in that.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, we didn't. It's a phenomenal question, and right when Colorado came up, I'm like, okay, well, this is going to be what that's about. No, we didn't, and in part because there wasn't anything quite yet to measure. I think marijuana would have been. I think this would actually get classified under retail. So as a result, but I think it does bring this kind of question to bear on the kinds of things like in some of the spin-off effect kind of issues that we might have in general about how, I think Colorado has seen some spikes in their tourism industry around this kind of, I don't know what they call it, but marijuana tourism. So I would be curious, but I don't have any real answers as to what that might mean for Mass going forward.
So that might be in line for a future study.
Right. I'd be happy to do it.
A question over in the front row.
Where does the rooms taxes go now? Does it go to the legislature or does it stay at the local level?
It's a mixture. There's a local excise that cities and towns as a local option can add on, and then a portion goes to the state as well. And I think in Boston, a portion goes to the convention center as well.
And a wee bit of that goes into marketing.
Yeah, teeny tiny.
Back here.
Hi, thanks for this great panel. I'm Julie, I'm from Mass Bay Community College, one of the career centers. And my actual question is, in the accommodations area of Leisure Hotel, what are your thoughts on the model where entrepreneurship is meeting as like a business model to have like work bars at hotels, where incubators are there? I know I visited the Westin, which is now the Starwood in Waltham now, and they have space. They have it's a very business model for accommodations, and I think that that could also be a really great area to really improve and increase that intersectionality with STEM and with all different industries within entrepreneurship.
It's a cool idea. Everybody and their brothers throwing space at us to open an incubator. And we've done actual studies, and most entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time and energy growing entrepreneurship on the Cape, which is a great pathway to owning your own business in the hospitality industry. But most people want services, they want knowledge, and they want access to capital more than the space.
Right here.
Thank you all for your.
Yep.
Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm Chris Shannon. I'm from the Boston Fed, the other TBF. And I was curious about, all of you have mentioned kind of high road employers, but most of them are kind of larger companies with deeper pockets. And I wondered about the impact of policies and practices that can increase employer investment in their workers for smaller businesses. If panelists could speak to any possible existing practices or policies or ones that they would like to see exist that would help incentivize small business to invest more in their workers and promote their business growth.
You know, most of what we've seen has been partnership efforts. So we're a city that doesn't have a lot of chain restaurants or, frankly, even large corporate hotels. It's very much independent operations. And the nonprofit I mentioned, Root, very popular in terms of connecting a younger workforce with learning this industry and getting exposed to it. We also have a vocational program in our high school and at our regional vocational school as well. And the more we can do to expose students to this ladder and to think of it as a ladder, that it might start as an entry-level job, but you know, you can become a banquet manager making $80,000 a year. I didn't know that. Or you can become a sous chef. That's a portable skill, right? If you go into any city, chances are you're going to be able to get a job if you have a particular skill set. So for us, I think we've really tried to work with our local workforce investment board, which has some state-funded training dollars, our existing education partners, and this nonprofit Root to create both the exposure and to the industry itself, but also to illustrate that career ladder. I think it's a well-kept secret. Most people think of healthcare as having a career ladder, but they don't necessarily think of tourism and hospitality or particular food as having a career ladder attached to it.
Jill, you have a long history in workforce development. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree that the career ladder is really important. If I look at the casinos, almost every vice president that you talk to, you ask, where did you start? The vice president of table games started as a dealer. The head chef at Encore started, as a line cook. Really interesting. And you may start somewhere else. I think there are, so I'm board chair of an organization called Commonwealth Kitchen. One of the restaurants is actually doing great things. It's a very small restaurant, but highly acclaimed. They're treating their employees very well. They're doing things like, company sharing and that sort of thing. And I think more promotion of smaller companies that are doing great things and treating their employees well would be a fantastic, give awards or highlight these opportunities. I don't know, I know it's a different situation when you have a larger corporation, but there are companies that are doing great things.
I'd also just mention Roca, another nonprofit we work with, who is also really trying to train particularly young men of color on a pathway to a career. And being able to partner with those organizations have the double benefit, right? It's helping our community, and it's also helping their organization and finding a permanent career path. So we may not have the larger companies that are running all of the various opportunities, but trying to work with nonprofits who frankly are better at it and have the skill set to put these career programs in place for us has been really positive.
One thing that we found is that small employers just don't have the time to put together a workforce training grant application, even though they pay into that system. So sometimes we have aggregated employers and have done a group application. But I do think that the simplification of access for employers to get that money, pull it back down for their staff would be really helpful.
Great. I think I see one hand way in the back.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Arian Allen. I'm from United Southern Settlements, and I'm a job developer. My question, for those who actually want to go up, as you mentioned, other people, they started in the industry and they grew. Is there a pathway for those who want to start at the bottom, but actually do want to go ahead and develop computer skills? Maybe they want to go from housekeeping to doing concierge work. Is there a pathway, a career pathway for these people who are interested in growing their careers?
Brian?
Well, the one that I'm most familiar with is through our training and education program. And the reason I think it's so effective is that it's done in very close consultation with the industry in terms of what are the skills that you need, because it's a constantly changing and evolving industry. So it's absolutely critical that the skills that get taught at our training and education program are relevant to what the industry needs. And so people who want to move from housekeeping to be concierge or belle or a waiter or a culinary can access that training there in a way that is completely relevant to the hotel that they work in at the time.
Jill?
So in January of next year, Encore Boston Harbor will begin to hire the bulk of their jobs, 3,800 jobs. And one of the things I've heard over and over is they're hiring many entry-level positions, but the one most important quality that each individual must possess is a high level of customer service. A smile, an ability to interact. And with that one quality, it is possible to move up, to shift, to move ahead at the company. And one of the things that we have seen is that there are certain positions. At Encore, there are over 900 positions that are designated as English language learner friendly. The company will provide English language classes on site, and they'll provide training. So it's possible to move and shift and get ahead.
I want to do one last question I got from Twitter, which, and I'll kind of summarize it. We're trending towards more hyper-local solutions, that if the federal government can't do it, then the state, and if the state can't do it, municipality, but then if you even go further, we're developing more business improvement districts. So the question is for Wendy, what are your thoughts on the Cape adopting a new tourism funding model based around a tourism improvement district where Cape businesses pay into it, and the chamber manages the deployment of funds for tourism marketing.
Been working on it for the last 12 months. Yeah, no, I mean, we.
You don't have your phone with you. You didn't send that question to me.
No, I think it's a brilliant idea, and self-determination is kind of what built New England. You know, we've suggested we put a toll on a bridge to get new bridges, and if people don't want to pay the toll, then don't come over the bridge. But we think they will. I mean, do you know how much you pay to park at Disney World?
Or
Do
rent
you?
a car in Florida.
Or rent a car in
ticket
Florida?
tax.
If you don't want to pay $5 to come over the bridge, then go to New Hampshire. No, I do think that there is a movement in this country to create bid districts. There is the enabling legislation that sets precedent in this state. A tourism destination marketing district would have a political process whereby we would have to have 51% of the vote of those who would be collecting an extra fee from the customers to go into a fund that would then be directed by those people that are participating. And I think it makes a lot of sense. What works for Cape Cod is a totally different mix of customers and timing than the Berkshires. We have huge $70 million being spent by New York City, and we have 4 closed visitor centers in Massachusetts. I mean, I could use some money to keep a visitor center open. That might not be what Boston needs. So I think it makes a lot of sense. There is enabling legislation. There's been a bill filed through the good work of the folks at the greater Springfield area in Western Mass, enabling legislation that would allow regions to realize that self-determination.
Well, with that brilliant idea, I think we'll end this part of the morning. Before I bring Paul up to close, would you please join me in thanking our panel?
Well, let me add my thanks to Mark Mellon for his excellent study, and to the panelists and to all of you for being here. This has strongly confirmed for us the need to bring more attention to this whole topic. It's been revelatory, I believe, in many of the things we have found out this morning. So we do feel confirmed that bringing attention to this area is all by itself is a very, very important thing to do. On the subject of workforce, I think we have to acknowledge that the United States has not been very good at workforce. It's been one of our social policy weaknesses. National workforce efforts have largely been anemic and unhelpful. But what you see is the ingenuity and drive at the state and particularly at the local level. And one of the big things for me is just hearing the ingenuity that our panelists and others are bringing to the very real dilemmas that they face. And that is still remains a great thing about this country, that people under pressure in their own communities will find ways to go forward. One additional reason this is also important that was stressed in the report but not mentioned in any of the comments was that jobs created by LHC are inherently place-based. They're going to be here. They're not going to be moved abroad, and that makes it doubly important that we realize the benefits. I think we may be underestimating the effect of the casinos are going to have. This sudden infusion of thousands and thousands of new jobs which pay very well with excellent benefits is got to have a wider effect than that. That concentration of people who by and large are making more money and have better benefits than in other locations. I was pleased that there was so much discussion about housing and transportation along with this. We have to bring those perspectives together with education and employment if we're going to find our way to the powerful solutions that we need. And I wonder if we can get action on some of these things when times are so good. I mean, this is just an incredible economy. this morning has revealed it's not working for everybody, or that we could make it even better and more inclusive if we do some things differently. Can we summon the resolve and the will to do those things when times are this good? And one thing to watch is the governor's housing proposal, which we applaud, and it's an important step if it is signed. Well, it hasn't been signed yet, it hasn't been passed. So that's one area where we might focus right away, is to give the governor some support in getting that housing bill passed. Final optimistic thought. There are win-wins to be forged here. And a great example that you heard this morning, and we've been very proud to be involved in it, is Local 26's training fund, taking a little sliver from people who are not well paid, but they're willing to give up that sliver of their income, the 14 cents, I think it was, Brian. And in aggregate, rolled up, that's become something significant, $1 million annually for training. And I think it's a win-win. We didn't have a hotel owner on the panel, but I bet there are plenty of them who would say that this has reduced turnover, improved morale, and they're with it. So there's got to be more things like that in times this good. And a tight labor market's a terrible thing to waste, so let's get at it. Thanks all of you for being here. Have a great day.